Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't notice anything was wrong until the radio went dead. It was early Saturday morning. I was 42 miles east of Redding, California, heading up into the Shasta Trinity National Forest in a second-hand 2012 Jeep Wrangler. The plan was simple: spend the weekend off-grid. No emails, no phone calls, just a couple of days hiking and photographing waterfalls near McCloud River. I'm a field ecologist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Most of my days are spent in the field anyway, tracking habitats, collecting samples, logging data, but I still needed the escape. This was my weekend off, and I wasn't planning on thinking about invasive amphibians or wildfire recovery zones. I had no idea the world was falling apart behind me. There were no alerts, no warnings, no amber banners scrolling across the highway signs, just a gradual strangling of signal until even FM radio faded to static. I thought it was the terrain at first. Up here, you lose reception halfway to Bernie. I had downloaded my maps ahead of time and brought my usual gear. A Sig Sauer P 320 pistol locked in its case, a Garmin InReach satellite communicator for emergencies, and my DSLR. I pulled off the forest road around 10 a.m. and followed a dirt track to a trailhead near Iron Canyon Reservoir. The Jeep barely fit between the leaning pine trees, and the branches scraped along the roof like claws. It was silent. Eerily silent. Not just the radio. No wind, no birdsong. Even the usual murmur of insects was gone. I chalked it up to the elevation, or maybe a storm on the way. The weather app hadn't loaded before I lost bars. I geared up and started hiking north into the thick forest, following a trail that skirted the canyon. I planned to make it to a small ridge where I'd spotted a potential overnight site on satellite imagery. I had enough food and supplies to last me 3 days if I paced myself. I didn't run into a single soul. No hikers, no campers, no one fishing along the shore. Around 3 p.m, the silence finally started to get to me. I stopped near a rise overlooking the reservoir, set down my pack and turned on the Garmin. It blinked, searching for a satellite, but couldn't lock on. I repositioned, gave it some time. Nothing. No coordinates, no messages, not even the SOS signal was going through. That had never happened before. A deep unease settled into my gut. I turned back toward the trail, intending to cut the trip short and get back to the Jeep, when I heard the first scream. Not an animal, a human scream. High-pitched, panicked, and far too close for comfort. I froze. Then a second voice, male, yelling incoherently, then a sharp, guttural snarl followed by silence. I crouched and listened. Nothing moved for several seconds. Then something burst through the tree line to my left. A man, maybe in his 30s, covered in blood and limping hard. His eyes were wild. His hands were empty. He saw me, flinched, then waved frantically. "They're here!" he screamed. "They're no, run!" And that's when the thing came after him. I say thing, because no way that was still human. It wore a torn sheriff's department uniform, Shasta County, but its skin was grey, its mouth was open far too wide, and the way it moved was all wrong, like its joints were out of sync. It sprinted after the man and tackled him mid-slope. I heard bones break. The man shrieked once, then the thing bit down into his throat with an animalistic frenzy. I fumbled for the P320. My fingers were slick with sweat. I backed up slowly, trying not to make a sound. Then it looked up. Its mouth was soaked red. It sniffed the air like a predator, and then it screamed. A wet, rasping howl that echoed down the valley. That scream wasn't meant to frighten prey. It was calling for more. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket. My boots slipped on loose rock and pine needles. I heard it chasing, crashing through the underbrush, and then more of them. From the shadows, from behind trees, at least 3, maybe 4. Their skin was discolored, blotched and slick with blood. Some of them wore hiking gear. One had a Forest Service patch on his sleeve. Whatever this was, it had already spread up here. I reached the Jeep just ahead of them. Keys out, door open, ignition struggling to catch. One of them hurled itself at the rear window as I peeled out in reverse. I clipped a stump but didn't stop. I spun onto the forest road and drove blind, tires skidding over gravel until the woods gave way to the main road. Still no bars, still no radio. I turned toward the nearest town, Big Bend. I needed answers, or at least people. I reached the edge of the town just after 5 p.m, and what I found hit harder than anything in the forest. Big Bend looked abandoned, power out, doors open, vehicles left running or crashed into mailboxes. I rolled to a stop near the general store. The place had been ransacked. There were signs of struggle, bloody handprints, shattered glass, spent 9mm casings scattered in the dirt. Someone had tried to defend this place and failed. I stepped out, pistol drawn, and called out. No response. Inside the store, the lights were dead. I swept the aisles, narrow, cluttered, stocked like any small-town supply depot. Canned food, trail mix, ammunition behind a locked glass case, mostly .2, 2S and 12 gauge. I heard something shuffle behind the counter. I aimed and waited. A girl, teenage, maybe 17, stood slowly, pale, shaking, not infected. Don't shoot, she whispered. Please. I lowered the pistol, but didn't holster it. Are you bit? She shook her head. No. I locked myself in the freezer when it started. They didn't find me. Are they gone? No, I said. They're in the woods, and they're spreading. She nodded like she already knew. My uncle tried the radio. Nothing. He said it was like the towers just stopped. Then they came out of nowhere. People from the campground. They weren't right. Where's your uncle now? She swallowed. He didn't make it. We gathered what we could. Flashlights, batteries, canned chili, water jugs, and a bolt-action .22 rifle with 3 full boxes of ammo. Not ideal, but better than nothing. I asked her name. Jessa, she said. Jessa Moore. I live 2 blocks from here. Or lived. I told her my name, David Niles. She flinched at the sound of it, like it reminded her that this was real. By 6 p.m, we were back on the road, heading south on Forest Route 27 toward Highway 299. The sun was already falling behind the hills. I hoped we'd find a working outpost, a ranger station, anything with a satellite uplink. Instead, we found the first military barricade. It was set up near the Whiskeytown Shasta border, on a 2-lane bridge over a dried-out creek bed. 2 Humvees, concrete barriers, coils of concertina wire stretched across the lanes. It looked hastily built but not abandoned. There were spent shell casings everywhere, black smears on the pavement. One of the Humvees still had its lights on, casting eerie shadows across the dead trees. I approached with my hands visible. Jessa stayed inside the Jeep. Hello? I called out. We're not infected. Silence. Then a rustle from the culvert under the bridge. A soldier, young, shaking, blood on his face, crawled out, dragging a busted M4 carbine and a medkit. He saw me, froze, then waved. Stay back, he croaked. Don't get close. They bit me. I'm done. I hesitated. What happened here? He tried to speak but started coughing blood. Then he managed. We were here to hold the line. They came at night, fast, no heartbeat, no pain, just rage. One of them looked like my sergeant. He ripped a guy's face off with his teeth. We couldn't hold it. Is there any comms? Satellite? Uplink? He shook his head with effort, his lips already turning blue. Signal's gone. EMP maybe, or something else. You're on your own. His hand twitched once, then again. His eyes stared past me, losing focus. The weapon in his lap slid from his grasp. I took a cautious step back, instinct screaming what was coming next. As his body slackened and fell still, I kept the pistol leveled. The moment his fingers began curling again, unnaturally and without coordination, I fired 3 quick rounds into his skull. The sound cracked across the canyon like thunder. He dropped flat and stayed there. I turned toward the Jeep. Jessa hadn't moved. Her face was pale in the headlights. I got in, started the engine, and we drove. 10 minutes passed before she spoke. Did you see his skin? It wasn't even bruised, just grey, like it already rotted from inside. I kept my eyes on the road. Whatever this is, it's not natural. That was an understatement. I'd done enough fieldwork to know how disease spreads. Vector dynamics, incubation timelines, symptom progression. I'd worked alongside wildlife disease specialists in Mono County, even responded to that plague case back in 2017. This wasn't microbial. It was something else. Instant neurological override. No fever, no pain, no confusion, just death and then rage. As we pushed south on the winding highway, night fell fast. Trees clawed at the edge of the road like dark teeth. I scanned every shadow for movement, gripping the wheel tighter with every mile. The Jeep's gas gauge was dropping steadily. We hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. Only 2 that were abandoned, one still smouldering from a fire that had burned out hours ago. Around 8 p.m, we reached a small Caltrans maintenance station near Oak Bottom. It was dark but intact. A heavy roll-up garage door was sealed shut, and the windows had been reinforced with plywood from the inside. There were tire tracks out front, wide and fresh, likely from a crew truck. I rolled to a stop. We check it. Could be fuel or radio, I said. Jessa stayed silent, but nodded. We circled the building with flashlights drawn and weapons ready. The front door had been barricaded with a workbench and cinder blocks, but the rear entrance was cracked open a few inches. I pushed it slowly. The air inside smelled like diesel, sweat, and old metal. The station was built like a bunker. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting overhead, heavy-duty tool lockers bolted down. Someone had tried to make a last stand here. Cots were set up in the break room, and food wrappers littered the floor. Empty water jugs were stacked neatly in the corner. Small ham radios sat on a desk, antenna wires snaking up into the ceiling tiles. But it was powered off and dead. There was no generator hum, no backup system running. We found them in the garage. 2 bodies slumped behind a snowplow, both wearing Caltrans orange, both torn open at the throat. No signs of reanimation. Either they died fast or someone put them down early. I siphoned a few gallons of gas from the maintenance truck out back and filled up the Jeep. In the locker room, I found a clean canvas duffel bag and started replacing gear. The bolt-action .22 went in, along with the boxes of ammunition, spare batteries, hand tools, and a pair of heavy-duty work gloves. I also found a crowbar and a fire axe. I kept the axe. Jessa kept the .22. We spent the night there with the doors bolted shut, sleeping in shifts. Every hour or so, I woke up to the creak of old pipes or the sound of branches scraping against the aluminum siding. Once, just after 2 a.m, something passed by the side window. Not a bear. Too smooth, too quick. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just kept my eyes closed and my finger on the trigger. At dawn, we left. There was no point waiting. Whatever happened out there was spreading faster than any wildfire I'd seen. If this thing, this infection, was already in the backwoods of Shasta County, it would hit Redding, Chico, and maybe even Sacramento within a day, assuming it hadn't already. We followed Highway 299 until we reached Bella Vista, but it was already too late. The small farming town looked like it had been overrun. The main street was littered with cars smashed into one another, storefronts broken open, bodies lying still in the gutters or moving unnaturally behind shattered windows. I saw one man standing barefoot in the middle of the road, twitching as if listening to something in his head. When we approached, he turned, looked straight at the Jeep and bolted, on foot, directly toward us. He wasn't running like a person. He was sprinting like a predator, arms locked, jaw open. Jessa screamed as I floored the gas and swerved around him. He struck the side mirror so hard it broke off. In the rear view, I saw him get up immediately and start chasing. Full sprint. We were doing 40. He kept pace for almost a quarter mile before finally collapsing in a twitching heap. His muscles had literally torn themselves apart. "Did you see that?" Jessa whispered. "He wasn't even tired. Just broke himself trying to catch us." I nodded grimly. Whatever this is, it rewires everything. We detoured west, trying to loop around the worst-hit areas. On a back road through Palo Cedro, we came across a group of survivors. 3 trucks had been parked in a triangle, forming a crude barricade at a 2-lane intersection. Armed civilians stood between them, some with hunting rifles, others with tools or sidearms. One of them wore a Reading Police Department uniform. Another had a Red Cross armband and a trauma bag. They stopped us at gunpoint but let us through after I identified myself and confirmed we weren't bitten. The leader was a man in his late 50s named Carl DeWitt, former Marine, now a construction foreman. He and a group of neighbours had organised when the power cuts and cell service died. They blocked roads, took in people from nearby farms, and rationed fuel. They had no outside contact. "We tried the emergency radios," Carl said. "Got one automated message in Morse code looping over and over. Then silence." "What did it say?" I asked. He rubbed his face and stared toward the hills. 3 letters, no E. "No E," I repeated. He nodded. "Never heard it used before. Not in any protocol I trained on. But everyone's calling it the first code. No signal, no exit, infected everywhere." The others nodded grimly. Apparently, more groups had heard the same thing, from a DHS channel out of Beale Air Force Base just before the repeaters went dead. That was 2 nights ago. Carl let us refill on water and gave us directions to a state police way station along I-5, rumoured to still be active. Said if anyone had answers, it would be there. We left before noon. Outside Anderson, we passed a row of scorched fields. Smoke still curled from a barn that had been firebombed, likely to contain whatever had gotten inside. In the distance, I spotted deer sprinting full tilt across the fields, and behind them, 2 of the infected giving chase, not hunting, just chasing for the sake of it. Both collapsed mid-run, but crawled forward until their limbs snapped under the strain. The infection didn't seem to care if the host survived long. It only cared about spreading. By the time we reached the outskirts of the way station, we were greeted by something that sent ice down my spine. The entire highway was blocked with K-rails and shipping containers stacked too high. Floodlights pointed outward. A guard tower stood in the center, manned but quiet. And on the asphalt in front of the barricade, someone had spray-painted 2 words in giant white letters. "Zone sealed." We rolled to a stop just outside the checkpoint. A voice barked over a loudspeaker. "Remain in the vehicle. Show your wrists." I raised both hands. Jessa did the same. We waited. 2 men in NBC suits approached, fully sealed, carrying SCAR rifles and handheld thermal scanners. They looked us over, ran checks, then waved us forward. The containers opened just long enough to let the Jeep in. Then they closed like jaws behind us. Inside was chaos. Generators hummed behind sandbags. Medical tents had been set up in the way station lot. Dozens of civilians huddled in the shade. Military officers moved briskly through the area, their faces tight with exhaustion. I recognized CDC technicians among them, marked with duct tape initials on their sleeves. Most of them looked like they'd been working non-stop for days. No one was sitting unless they were injured. Everyone wore a sidearm or had one within reach. A sergeant waved us to a designated parking spot near a cordoned-off tent. A medic, name tag said Ramos, approached with a tablet and a body scanner. He didn't ask for permission, just started the scan, checking for elevated core temperature, broken capillaries, abnormal neural response, and most importantly, bite trauma. We passed, barely. Jessa's heart rate was too high, but they chalked it up to shock. We were handed color-coded armband green for cleared, yellow for under observation, red for exposed. A few people inside wore blue ones. I asked about them, and Ramos gave me a look that told me not to press. Later I found out they were researchers, epidemiologists and virologists from the CDC's Rapid Response Unit. Specialists flown in days before signal loss. They were the only ones with partial knowledge of what we were dealing with. Jessa and I debriefed inside one of the logistics trailers. It was cooler there, quieter. A young officer named Lieutenant Carly Morrison ran the session. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, but from fatigue. She barely looked up as she typed, logging every detail I gave her. The abandoned ranger outpost, the infected soldier, the sprinting infected near Bella Vista, even the possible Morse transmission. When I mentioned the acronym NOE, she finally paused. "We've heard it too," she said quietly. "It's not an official protocol, not from us. Came through military satellite bands. We think it's a burn signal, code for a complete loss of containment and communication. It appeared right after NORAD went dark." I stared at her. "NORAD's offline?" She nodded. Cheyenne Mountain stopped responding 72 hours ago. Before that, we had pings from Colorado Springs, but they stopped mid-transmission. We don't know if they're compromised or if they sealed themselves off completely. I leaned back against the wall. That's a fail-deadly node. If they're down, then we're alone, Morrison finished. She told us what little else she knew. The infection, whatever it was first noticed near Spokane, Washington. A few anomalous 911 calls reporting extreme aggression, but no coordination between counties meant it was dismissed as drugs or mental illness. Within 48 hours, it spread into Oregon and Northern California. Cities were hit next, first Portland, then Eugene, then Redding. By the time state and federal agencies understood the scale, communications had already begun to collapse. What we were seeing was not a virus in the traditional sense. It didn't follow the usual rules. No incubation, no fever, no time to act. The body died, and then something else took over. Fast. "It doesn't seem to need the brain to function," she said. "Just the nervous system. It hijacks the spine like a marionette. The head can be damaged and the body still attacks." I thought of the man in the woods, the one who whispered, "No heartbeat." There was no cure, no antiviral, no vaccine. All they could do was build zones, contain movement, and slow the spread long enough to get an idea of what they were facing. The way station was part of that last-ditch containment line, holding I-5 north of Red Bluff. It was never meant to be a long-term facility, just a choke point. As we were released from the trailer, the sergeant at the checkpoint handed us over to a logistics officer who asked if we had any practical skills. I mentioned my forestry background and wilderness emergency training. Jessa said she worked in veterinary pathology, which immediately got her flagged by the CDC team. They had lost 2 researchers the day before and needed anyone who could handle blood samples and follow basic containment protocol. They separated us. I didn't like it, but I didn't argue. We needed to be useful. That was how you stayed alive here, by being needed. They assigned me to Zone 3, the perimeter patrol, a 5-man squad rotating around the northern barricade, doing reconnaissance on the tree line, sweeping for movement, listening for the infected. My squad leader was a quiet man named Staff Sergeant Wayne Porter, former Army Ranger, now California National Guard. He was built like a tree stump and carried a suppressed M4 like it was an extension of his spine. His team consisted of 2 guardsmen, 1 civilian with prior service, and now me. We left at dusk. Zone 3 was a stretch of wooded slope west of the freeway, broken by drainage culverts and gravel service roads. The scent of pine and hot dust still clung to everything, but it was fading, replaced by something mustier, the kind of rot that lived under the surface. We moved silently, headlamps off, weapons up. Every hour, we stopped and did audio scans, just listening. At 22 o'clock, we heard movement. Not a deer, not a bear, too light, too fast, too coordinated. Porter raised a fist and everyone froze. Seconds later, a shape broke from the tree line, not running, loping, like a machine taught how humans move. It kept to the shadows, circling wide, I lifted my rifle, but Porter grabbed my forearm and held it. He didn't want to fire. Not unless we had to. It was gone in moments. The trees swallowed it whole. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, once we moved again. Porter didn't look back. A scout. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. At midnight, we rotated back to camp. The eastern sky was glowing faintly orange. I thought it was the sunrise. Then I saw the smoke columns. Someone had torched the outskirts of Reading. Whether it was the infected or a last-ditch defense, I couldn't say. Back at base, things had worsened. The medical tents were packed. 2 people had collapsed during the night, both now restrained. CDC personnel were running blood work under gas lanterns and muttering about RNA degradation and non-viral replication. Jessa looked up as I approached her tent. Her gloves were soaked red, but her eyes were clear. She hadn't been infected. Not yet. "They're calling it an extracellular hijack," she said. "Not a virus, not even a spore. It doesn't need to replicate inside the cells. It coats the nervous tissue like a mycelial web. It uses the host like scaffolding." I stared at her. She continued. "And it's immune to heat. They tried incinerating tissue samples. The structure held. We're talking about something that mimics biology, but isn't. Synthetic, maybe. Engineered. Or older than we know how to study." The implications were impossible to grasp. The next day, just after sunrise, the base alarm sounded. Everyone rushed to the south wall. Porter and I grabbed rifles and sprinted to the containers overlooking the freeway. A Humvee came into view first, racing full tilt down the highway, bouncing across broken concrete, its front axle cracked and windshield spiderwebbed. Behind it came a wave, not a few, not a dozen, hundreds. They came pouring down I-5 like ants after a scent trail. Some wore uniforms, some wore hospital gowns, some were burned, missing limbs, faces half destroyed. None of them cared. They moved as one. They didn't just rush the wall, they dissected it, like they'd studied it, where the containers hadn't been reinforced, where the seams left a few inches of breathing room, where the flame-retardant tarp sagged and curled from heat exposure. Those were the points that fell first. The infected didn't behave like a starving mob. They moved with terrifying purpose. One group went straight for the generator tents. Another veered off toward the medical units. And a third flanked the main ingress gate, crawling over each other like a tidal surge of limbs and teeth. Porter was already shouting into his radio for fallback orders, but the channel was static and garbled. The EMP shielding on our main relay had been hit the day before in a storm. Nobody thought it was high priority. Now it meant we were shouting into the void. No one was coming. No one even knew we were still alive. We fell back to the secondary perimeter. Just a line of stacked concrete barriers and a few sandbagged machine gun nests. Civilians were being rushed toward the east side of the way station where evac transports were staged. I could see 2 buses idling with their lights on, but no drivers in sight. Someone screamed that the keys were gone. Another voice yelled that the fuel lines had been siphoned last night by someone who tried to run. Jessa was still in the CDC tent. I sprinted across the open lot, past craters of blood and shell casings, ducking behind Humvees and trucks as gunfire cracked around me. One of the infected lunged from behind a comms trailer, shirtless, jaws clenching like a broken hinge, mouth and chin torn open from some previous fight. I didn't even raise my rifle, just sidestepped and shoved with the buttstock as hard as I could. He tripped, slammed face first into the pavement, and kept writhing like a flipped beetle. I didn't look back. I had 10 seconds of luck, and I used it to get to the tent. Inside, Jessa was already packing gear into a thermal crate. Test tubes, hard drives, blood samples wrapped in foil. Her gloves were soaked and torn. One of the blue band researchers lay dead near the entry flap. His face caved in, the blunt force so savage it had dented the metal table behind him. A fire axe lay beside his hand. I grabbed it. "They're breaching," I told her. "We have maybe 5 minutes." She nodded once. "I need one more file set, on that drive." She pointed toward the researcher's crushed body. I didn't hesitate. I reached past what was left of his chest cavity and yanked the encrypted thumb drive from the tether around his neck. It was warm. I stuffed it into my pocket and grabbed the crate. We bolted out just as something tore through the canvas behind us. It wasn't a scream exactly, just a wet, gurgled snarl, the sound of a throat that no longer remembered how to breathe, only how to kill. Outside, the lot was pure bedlam. Machine gun fire lit up the barricades like strobe lights. Someone had turned one of the trucks into a battering ram and was trying to plow a path for the civilians to escape. The wheels hit corpses, body parts, debris, and kept spinning. A man in fatigues stood on the roof of the truck firing single shots into the horde. Another was lying on the hood, motionless. Porter caught sight of us and waved frantically from the fuel depot. "This way!" We ran, weaving between overturned containers and broken floodlight stands. More infected were spilling through the north fence now, crawling over the burned-out fencing like they'd rehearsed it. Some had dislocated limbs and shattered feet, but it didn't matter. They didn't stop. At the depot, 2 armoured pickups were gassed and ready. One had a roof turret rigged from a decommissioned Humvee. Porter climbed into the gunner hatch. I tossed the crate into the rear seat and pulled Jessa in beside me. A guardsman jumped into the driver's seat and punched the ignition. The diesel engine roared to life just as another flood of infected reached the southern line. Porter yelled over the noise, "Head south, back roads only, interstate is overrun." The driver floored it. The pickup fishtailed through the barricade gap, tires kicking up dust and flecks of bone. A second truck followed us, but I didn't see if it made it out. In the rear view, the way station disappeared behind a wall of smoke and bodies. The radio crackled once, then silence. We drove for nearly an hour in winding silence. The landscape a blur of scorched pine and shattered roadway. The old US Forest Service trail we followed had been used during the August complex fires a few years back, which meant it was still technically drivable, though barely. Fallen branches scraped the chassis. At one point, we had to drive through the burnt-out shell of a campsite. Every tent was melted, and there were bones scattered across fire pits and picnic tables. Eventually, we reached a long-abandoned ranger station. It was built from stone and timber back in the 1930s. No metal framing, no electrical grid, no cellular repeaters. That made it safe, or as safe as anywhere could be. Porter called for a halt. We moved fast, securing the perimeter, boarding windows, dragging out mouldy furniture. A hand-painted sign still hung above the porch. Eagle Nest Lookout. Elevation 4,232 feet. It would serve as our fallback, our redoubt. We were down to 7 people, 2 guardsmen, Porter, Jessa, myself, and a teenager from the evac group named Leo, who had lost his parents on the freeway. The last was a woman named Harper, former police K9 handler from Chico. She carried a shortwave radio and a Remington 870 with slug rounds, and she didn't speak much. That night, we listened to the scanner, static. Then, around 0200, we heard a faint signal. Not a voice, just a pulsing pattern. 5 tones, pause, 3 tones, pause, repeat. Jessa leaned forward, analysing it. "That's not random," she said. "It's data, analog compression, something old school, MIL STD 188-141B. Someone's trying to transmit a data burst." We tried triangulating, but the signal was too weak. Still, it meant something else. Someone out there was still fighting. By morning, we had reinforced the station and started mapping escape routes. We had 1 drone with limited battery and no GPS lock. It gave us just enough aerial footage to spot the edges of a new swarm headed east. We estimated their speed, 15 to 20 miles a day. Coordinated, but not omniscient. That gave us maybe 2 days before they swept this area. Jessa and I worked out of the ranger office, converting it into a field lab. She was determined to analyze the samples. Whatever was on that drive, she said, might help someone eventually find a way to halt this thing. She was convinced it wasn't natural. The structures in the neural webbing weren't random. There was a repeating pattern in the geometry, like someone built it or trained it. On the second night, the infected found us. They didn't charge, not right away. They surrounded the station and waited, hundreds of them, silent, unmoving. You could barely see them through the trees, but their eyes reflected like animal eyes in a camera flash. Some still twitched, some flexed their fingers like they were learning how. Leo curled up in the kitchen, trembling. Harper loaded every shell she had into a single duffel. I stood at the window with the axe in my hands, listening to my own heartbeat and wondering if I'd survive the next hour. Porter didn't say anything. He just adjusted his scope and picked his first target. When they finally attacked, it wasn't a charge. It was an uncoiling, like they'd just received permission. We fought for 3 hours. They broke through twice. We lost one of the guardsmen and nearly lost Jessa when the outer hallway collapsed under a surge of weight. At sunrise, they were gone, vanished, not even corpses left behind. They don't die when you shoot them. Not really, you only slow them. And now we knew something worse, something no one on the outside had even guessed. They were learning, not just mimicking us, studying, adapting, testing. I buried the guardmen with a salvage flag from the way station and sat on the porch, staring into the woods, wondering what else they'd figured out already. The next night, the signal came again, stronger this time, but now it wasn't just tones. It was a voice. If you can hear this, we are still alive. Camp Echo, Grid 10, North, 74 West. Holding, supplies limited, resistance forming, no cure, no extraction. But if you're armed, if you're breathing, you are not alone. Jessa stood behind me, hands shaking, staring at the shortwave receiver. Porter loaded his last magazine and said, "We're going." I looked at the map. It was over 200 miles away, through infected territory. No signal, no guarantee of fuel, no roads. But it didn't matter, because it was hope, and hope was the last thing the infected hadn't figured out how to kill. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.